Today, our cities are flooded with illegal aliens. Americans are being squeezed out of the labor force and their jobs are taken. By the way, you know who's taking the jobs that are created? 107% of those jobs are taken by illegal aliens.
Donald Trump's rise wasn't just about policies, it was about emotions. Fear, pride, anger, they aren't just feelings. They shape identity, bind groups, and create boundaries between us and them. Why do these emotions resonate so strongly with his white working-class male supporters, and how does fragile masculinity play into this? Let's break it down. In sociology, emotions are social, not just personal. Trump manipulates collective emotions, fear of outsiders, pride in nationalism, and anger at elites to unite his base. These emotions create a shared identity, with Trump positioning himself as a protector of these values, framing his leadership as a fight to defend tradition. Now let's bring in the concept of fragile masculinity. Fragile masculinity is a social construct tied to dominance and power. When these norms are challenged, many men feel insecure. Trump's strongman persona speaks directly to this anxiety, glorifying toughness and defiance while rejecting vulnerability. His rhetoric turns this insecurity into collective anger and loyalty. What happens when these emotions are weaponized? Trump weaponizes emotions by addressing a crisis of masculinity. As traditional male roles erode, many men feel marginalized and estranged. He channels this into hypermasculinity, portraying dominance as the ideal manhood. Through gendered stories of victimhood, he reframes their pain as righteous anger, transforming victimhood into strength and mobilizing his supporters. But what happens when these emotions, fear, pride, and anger, are weaponized on a national scale? Trump's rhetoric taps into white working-class men's sense of lost identity as traditional roles disappear. His message of strength offers them empowerment, but it deepens societal divisions. By idealizing traditional masculinity and framing those who challenge it, immigrants, minorities, women, as threats, his emotional appeal fosters inequality and polarization. This makes it harder for society to unite.
Discussing how fatherhood influences men's expressions of hybrid masculinity, which blends traditional masculine traits with more emotionally expressive caregiving behaviors. To explore this topic, I focus on two key questions. First, how does becoming a father influence men's expressions of masculinity, especially hybrid masculinity? And second, how do cultural expectations and emotions such as pride or vulnerability shape this shift in behavior? Hybrid masculinity refers to the blending of traditional masculine traits like strength and stoicism with qualities traditionally associated with femininity, such as emotional openness and caregiving. In the context of fatherhood, this means fathers who are both providers and nurturing figures. Examples of hybrid masculinity in fatherhood includes fathers who are deeply involved in childcare, showing both emotional expressiveness and physical nurturing. These fathers combine the traditional role of the provider with a more emotionally supportive, hands-on approach to parenting. Hybrid masculinity contrasts with compensatory masculinity. Well, compensatory masculinity occurs when men feel the need to overcompensate for non-traditional roles. Hybrid masculinity is about blending both traditionally masculine and nurturing behaviors. Fatherhood brings emotional depth, leading men to experience pride and vulnerability. This emotional shift challenges the traditional masculine expectation of emotional restraint and supports the development of hybrid masculinity, where men can express feelings and still fulfill roles as providers. As men embrace hybrid masculinity, family dynamics evolve. Children benefit from fathers who model emotional openness, and families as a whole experience stronger bonds and more equitable gender roles in the home. In conclusion, fatherhood plays a crucial role in redefining masculinity. As fathers blend traditional roles with caregiving, they not only create a healthier family environment, but also contribute to gender equality by breaking down rigid gender norms.
So, hegemonic masculinity and what are the influences? What is hegemonic masculinity? It's a concept used to describe the dominant form of masculinity within a society. It sets the ideal standard for what it means to be a man, and it's characterized by stoicism, dominance, strength, and control over emotions. Some men who feel like they don't meet these expectations feel the need to overcompensate in other ways to meet these standards. Nature versus nurture. Nature's the idea that these masculine traits like anger and aggression are just how men are and are just born that way. Nurture is the argument that gender norms are learned and boys are taught to value toughness, suppress all emotions, and assert dominance. Factors like their parents and social media shape these values and their perception of masculine identity. Today, we're going to focus on just the nurture or the socialization factors of boys because it's much more impactful on hegemonic masculinity. So, these are examples of some social and gender norms that males experience. So, things like suck it up and men are supposed to be providers are examples of these gender norms. Peer relationships on hegemonic masculinity. So, in a study called Daddy Issues, shows that male relationships with other men are more impactful in whether a male will reflect hegemonic masculinity traits more so than their relationship with their father or motherly figure, and that parental absence has small to moderate correlations to other adverse childhood experiences. So, their relationship with their father and mother is not necessarily tied to the child's ability to develop these hegemonic masculinity traits. The study shows that peer relationships between men are more impactful. Men will reinforce their masculinity through peer interactions or with their friends. So, in other words, just gaining approval of these men. Being tough and promoting manly behavior is rewarded by other men, while emotional expression and vulnerability might be seen as a sign of weakness or unmanly. This is also tied to locker room culture, which is the environment where these dominant masculine traits are often celebrated and rewarded. So, what this means for society, it shows a reinforcement of gender inequalities. So, hegemonic masculinities upholds a power dynamic where women are marginalized and so are other minority individuals. So, the social impact on men who feel like they have to suppress their emotions all the time might experience depression or anxiety and distract themselves with drug abuse and alcohol. Social relationships, hegemonic masculinity can negatively affect all the relationships and their overall ability for social connectedness.
Other people. And if you look at men who have no emotional control, anger, you have school shootings, you have rape, you have violence. That's what happens when you tell men to have no emotional control. These school shooters are kids with no emotional control. Rapists are men with no emotional control. Violence and the bullshit you see on the street are men with no emotional control. Telling men to not be stoic is going to create a breed of violent young men who have no emotional control, can't control their emotions, and act out on them. Absolutely not be more dangerous to society than me coming along saying your duties and your responsibilities as an adult, you must comply and act a certain way regardless of how you feel.
Andrew Tate and Donald Trump have given men an outlet to express themselves about the topic of masculinity and how there is a lack of it. The clip presented is a perfect example of fragile masculinity. Fragile masculinity is when men feel anxiety about not meeting the cultural standards of manhood, which leads them to adopt compensatory behavior to prove their masculinity. Tate mentions that emotional men tend to be more violent and angrier. However, it is the opposite. It is when masculine men feel like their masculinity is threatened that they get angrier and in some cases violent. The cultural norms of genders have shifted, but the old masculine idea has not evolved into a more modern version to fit society and the growth of gender equality, according to an interview by MSNBC dissecting Trump's masculinity. This picture is a perfect example of the old masculine ideal and what the new masculine ideal could be. Tim Walter presents the new masculine ideal compared to JD, who represents the old masculine ideals.